Alexander Chen sat in his massive corner office on the 45th floor, staring at the city skyline below. At 35 years old, he had everything most people dreamed of. A billion-dollar tech company, a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine, cars that cost more than most people's houses. But lately, none of it felt like enough. Actually, it felt empty. The divorce papers on his desk were finally signed. His ex-wife had walked away with $50 million and a smile on her face. She'd never loved him, he realized too late. She'd loved his money, his status, the glamorous life he could provide. And she wasn't the only one. Over the years, Alexander had watched people he trusted steal from him, lie to him, use him. His business partner had tried to sell company secrets. His childhood friend had leaked information to competitors. Even his own cousin had attempted to embezzle funds. Trust had become a foreign concept to Alexander. Now he tested everyone who came into his life. It was exhausting, but it felt necessary. Better to catch people in their true colors early than be disappointed later. That's when he heard about the new maid, his head of household staff. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned her during their weekly meeting. Her name is Maya Rodriguez, sir. 28 years old. Excellent references from her previous employer. She'll be handling the morning cleaning shift 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Alexander barely looked up from his phone. Put her through the usual background check. And keep an eye on her for the first month. Of course, sir, Mrs. Patterson replied, though something in her tone suggested she wanted to say more. She didn't. Nobody questioned Alexander's methods anymore. Maya started on a Monday morning. Alexander made sure to walk through the hallways at odd times, observing her from a distance. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore the standard uniform and kept her eyes down, never making direct contact with anyone. The other staff members tried to chat with her during breaks, but she'd give short, polite answers and quickly return to work. She's odd, that one, Alexander overheard the cook telling the gardener. Barely says 2 words. Refuses snacks from the kitchen. Won't even take a proper lunch break. Maybe she's just nervous, the gardener replied. You know how Mr. Chen is. Everyone's terrified of making mistakes. Alexander didn't feel guilty hearing that. Fear kept people honest, he reasoned. Or at least it kept them careful. By the end of Maya's second week, Alexander decided it was time for his test. The one that had caught every thief, every liar, every person with bad intentions. It was simple, really. He'd pretend to be asleep in various rooms of the house, leaving valuable items carelessly scattered around. His laptop open with confidential files, his wallet stuffed with cash, expensive watches on the table. Then he'd watch through barely opened eyes to see what people did when they thought nobody was looking. His previous assistant had photographed documents on his laptop. A former driver had pocketed $200 from his wallet. A housekeeper had stolen a pair of diamond cufflinks. Each time Alexander had caught them, fired them, and felt his faith in humanity die a little more. Friday morning arrived, and Alexander set his trap. He chose his study, a room Maya cleaned around 8 a.m. The night before, he deliberately left his laptop open on the desk, the screen showing financial projections worth millions if leaked to competitors. His wallet sat beside it, containing at least $3,000 in cash. He'd scattered his expensive cufflinks across the desk, including a pair his mother had given him before she died, worth over $10,000. His watch, a limited edition piece worth $80,000, rested carelessly on some papers. At 7:45, Alexander positioned himself in the large leather armchair near the window. He slouched slightly, letting his head tilt at an angle, his arms loose on the armrests. To anyone entering, he'd look like he'd fallen asleep while reading. He controlled his breathing, keeping it deep and steady. Then he waited, his eyes closed to mere slits so he could see through his lashes without being obvious. At exactly 8 a.m., he heard the door open quietly. Maya's soft footsteps entered the room, and Alexander caught a glimpse of her through his barely open eyes. She carried her cleaning supplies in a small caddy, moving as silently as possible. She stopped suddenly. Alexander assumed she'd spotted the valuable items, and his muscles tensed, ready to catch her in whatever act she was about to commit. He'd seen it all before. The casual pocket of cash, the quick phone photo of documents, the smooth pocketing of jewelry. His heart hardened, preparing for yet another disappointment. But Maya didn't move toward the desk. Instead, she took a step closer to him, and Alexander's pulse quickened. What was she doing? Through his lashes, he watched her face, expecting to see calculation, greed, or opportunity. Instead, he saw concern. Maya's eyebrows drew together in a worried expression. She bit her lip, looking at him with genuine anxiety. Then Alexander realized what she was focused on. Not the money, not the laptop, not the jewelry. She was staring at his neck, at the awkward angle his head had fallen to. She seemed worried that he was uncomfortable, that he might wake up in pain. What happened next made Alexander's breath catch in his throat. Maya carefully, almost reverently, set down her cleaning supplies on the floor, making no sound. She tiptoed to the sofa across the room and picked up the soft cashmere throw blanket draped over its back. Moving like she was approaching something fragile, she returned to his chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the blanket, and with extraordinary gentleness, she draped it over him, making sure it covered his arms and chest. She even tucked it slightly around his shoulders, the way a mother might cover a sleeping child. Alexander's mind reeled. This wasn't in the script. Nobody had ever done this before. He struggled to maintain his steady breathing, to keep his eyes from opening fully in shock, but Maya wasn't finished. She noticed his reading glasses sliding down, about to fall from his lap onto the floor. She caught them with a quick, careful movement and placed them safely on the side table next to him. Then her eyes fell on the laptop, its screen still glowing with those confidential files, those documents worth millions. This is it, Alexander thought. This is where she takes out her phone, where she photographs the screen or memorizes the numbers or does something to benefit from this opportunity. Maya walked to the desk. Alexander's heart pounded so hard he was sure she could hear it. His muscles coiled, ready to spring up and confront her. But Maya simply reached out and gently closed the laptop lid, being careful not to let it snap shut and make noise that might wake him. She adjusted it so it sat squarely on the desk, neat and protected. Then she saw the cufflinks scattered across the desk surface. Alexander watched as she carefully gathered each one, her touch delicate, treating them like they were precious. Which they were, but how would she know that? She placed them one by one in the small crystal dish on the corner of his desk, the dish he actually used for storing them. She knew where they belonged. She'd been paying attention to how his space was organized. The cash in his wallet sat right there, visible, easy to access. Maya's eyes passed over it without a second glance. She didn't touch it, didn't even pause to look at it. It was like the money didn't exist to her. Alexander felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart. Then Maya did something that completely froze him. She noticed a silver picture frame on his desk had fallen face down, probably knocked over by his elbow when he'd arranged his sleeping position. She picked it up gently, and Alexander watched her face as she looked at the photograph. It was a picture of him with his mother, taken a year before she died. He was 25 in that photo, and she was smiling at him with such pride and love. Maya's expression softened. She pulled a clean corner of her apron from her uniform and carefully wiped a small smudge from the glass. Then she positioned the frame back on the desk, angling it slightly so it would be visible to him from his chair. She stood there for a moment, just looking at the photo, and a sad, understanding smile crossed her face. Then Maya did something that made Alexander's eyes burn with unexpected emotion. She whispered so softly he almost didn't hear it. She must have been very proud of you. She said it like she meant it. Like she could see the love in that photograph and understood its value. Like she knew what it meant to love someone that deeply. Maya stood there for another heartbeat, then picked up her cleaning supplies and began to work. She cleaned around him with such quiet efficiency that she made virtually no sound. She dusted shelves on the opposite side of the room. She vacuumed so gently in the far corners that the sound barely registered. She wiped down surfaces with careful precision. And every few minutes, she'd glance over at him, making sure he was still sleeping comfortably, making sure the blanket hadn't slipped. When she finished 45 minutes later, Maya took one last look around the room to ensure everything was perfect. Then she gazed at Alexander one more time, that same concerned, caring expression on her face. and quietly left the room, closing the door with barely a click. Alexander sat there, no longer pretending to sleep, staring at the closed door in complete shock. His test had failed, or rather it had succeeded in a way he never expected. He'd been testing for dishonesty and found something he didn't even know he was looking for anymore. He'd found genuine human kindness. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about what happened. He sat in his study long after Maya left, the cashmere blanket still draped over his shoulders, staring at the photograph of his mother. Her words echoed in his memory. Words she'd told him when he was just starting his business, young and hopeful and not yet jaded by betrayal. "Alex, honey," she'd said, holding his face in her hands, "success will bring you many things, but it will also show you who people really are. Don't let the bad ones make you forget that good people exist. They're out there. They're just quieter. They don't announce themselves." He'd forgotten that. Somewhere between building his empire and protecting it from vultures, he'd forgotten to look for the good. He'd become so focused on catching people doing wrong that he'd stopped believing anyone could do right. But Maya had done right, and she hadn't even known he was watching. Alexander made a decision. He needed to test her again. Not because he didn't believe what he'd seen, but because he needed to know if it was real, if it was consistent. One act of kindness could be a fluke, a performance, a coincidence. But repeated behavior? That showed character. Over the next week, Alexander set up more situations. Each morning, he'd position himself in different locations throughout the mansion, always pretending to be asleep, always leaving valuable items nearby. And each morning, Maya's behavior remained exactly the same. On Monday, he slept in the library, slouched in the reading chair near the fireplace. He'd left his tablet on the side table, unlocked and showing his banking app with account balances visible. Millions of dollars right there on the screen. He'd also scattered several rare first edition books on the floor beside his chair, as if they'd slipped from his lap. These books were worth thousands each. Collectors would pay outrageous amounts for them. Maya entered the library at her scheduled time and froze when she saw him. Again, that same concerned look crossed her face. She noticed the awkward position of his arm hanging off the chair's armrest and carefully, gently, lifted it to rest more comfortably. Then she saw the books on the floor. Alexander watched through his barely open eyes as Maya knelt down and picked up each book with both hands, cradling them like they were made of glass. She checked each one for damage, running her fingers along the spines with such care. Then she noticed the titles. Her face changed, lit up with something that looked like longing. She held one book for a longer moment, a classic novel, and he could see she wanted to open it, wanted to read it. Her fingers traced the embossed title on the cover, but she didn't open it. Instead, she carried each book to the shelf and returned them to their exact positions. Alexander knew because he'd memorized where they were. She got every single one right. The tablet sat there, screen glowing with all his financial information. Maya glanced at it only to tap the screen off so it wouldn't drain the battery. She never looked at the numbers, never showed any interest in the amounts displayed there. She simply protected his device the way she'd protected everything else. On Tuesday, he tested her in the morning room, a sunlit space overlooking the gardens. This time, he'd been more careless with his setup. His laptop was open to emails discussing a major business acquisition worth hundreds of millions. His wallet sat on the table with cash visibly sticking out. A velvet box containing his mother's pearl necklace, worth over $50,000, sat half open beside his coffee cup. Maya came in, saw him sleeping in the uncomfortable wicker chair, and immediately went to get cushions from the nearby sofa. She placed them behind his back and under his arm, trying to make the rigid chair more comfortable. Then she organized everything on the table, closing the laptop, straightening the wallet, and closing the velvet box. She moved the coffee cup away from the edge where it might spill. She never opened the box to look at the necklace, never touched the cash, never glanced at the emails. Wednesday brought the most telling test. Alexander positioned himself in the greenhouse, a humid, warm space filled with his mother's beloved orchids. He'd kept them alive for 5 years since her death, even though he had no talent for gardening. He paid a specialist to maintain them because he couldn't bear to let them die. He fell asleep on the bench, and this time he made himself look truly uncomfortable. His neck bent at a terrible angle. His body twisted awkwardly. If someone saw him like this, they'd know he'd wake up in serious pain. Maya entered the greenhouse and gasped softly when she saw him. She actually looked distressed. She approached quickly, then hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to help and not wanting to overstep boundaries. Alexander could see the internal struggle on her face. Finally, Maya made a decision. She carefully, with hands that shook slightly from nervousness, adjusted his position. She supported his head as she shifted him so his neck wasn't bent. She straightened his body so his back aligned properly. She did it all with such gentle care that he barely felt the movements. Then she found a gardening cushion and placed it under his head. But what happened next made Alexander's chest tighten with emotion. Maya noticed the orchids, his mother's orchids. One of them was drooping, its leaves yellowing slightly. The specialist must have missed it during the last visit. Maya stood up and examined the plant carefully. Then she did something unexpected. She adjusted the plant's position, moving it away from direct sunlight. She tested the soil with her finger and went to the watering station to get a small amount of water, just enough to moisten the dry soil. She cared for the plant like it mattered, like it was important. Then Maya saw it. A small framed card next to the orchid collection. Alexander's mother had written it in her final weeks. These beauties need love and attention, just like people. Don't forget that, my darling boy. Maya read the card and tears filled her eyes. Actual tears. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. She looked at Alexander sleeping on the bench, then back at the orchids, and understanding seemed to dawn on her face. These plants meant something to him. They were connected to someone he'd lost. She spent an extra 10 minutes in that greenhouse, checking every single orchid, making small adjustments, ensuring they were all healthy. She did it for free on her own time because she saw that it mattered. Thursday's test was simpler but perhaps most revealing. Alexander pretended to sleep in his home office, and this time he left an envelope on his desk. A plain white envelope with cash inside and a note that read, "Emergency fund for any staff member who needs it. Take what you need, no questions asked." Inside the envelope was $10,000 in $100 bills. Alexander watched Maya clean the office. She dusted shelves, organized papers, wiped down surfaces. Then she saw the envelope. She picked it up, curious, and read the note. Her hands began to shake. Maya opened the envelope and saw the cash. Her eyes went wide, and she made a sound like a gasp mixed with a sob. She sat down in the desk chair, staring at the money like she couldn't believe it was real. Tears streamed down her face. Her fingers trembled as she touched the bills, counting them without removing them from the envelope. $10,000. Alexander watched her face and saw everything there. Relief, hope, desperation. This money clearly meant something enormous to her. This wasn't pocket change. This was life-changing. Maya sat there for a full 5 minutes, holding that envelope, crying silently. She pulled out her phone and looked at something on the screen. A photo, Alexander realized. A photo of a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, smiling at the camera with missing front teeth and bright, happy eyes. Maya touched the photo on her screen, then looked back at the money. She was having an internal battle, and Alexander could see every emotion playing across her face. She needed this money. That much was obvious. Whatever situation she was in, this cash would help tremendously. Then Maya did something that made Alexander's throat close up with emotion. She carefully put the cash back in the envelope, making sure every bill was neat and straight. She wiped her tears with her sleeve. She placed the envelope exactly where she'd found it, positioning it precisely. And then she stood up, took several deep breaths to compose herself, and went back to cleaning. She didn't take a single dollar, not one. Alexander watched her work for the next 20 minutes, and he could see the effort it took for her to focus. She kept glancing at the envelope. Several times she stopped what she was doing, stared at it, and he could see her reconsidering. The temptation was there. The need was there. But each time she shook her head slightly and returned to her work. When Maya finally left the office, Alexander sat up and stared at the envelope. His hands were shaking. In all his years of testing people, of expecting the worst from humanity, he'd never seen anything like this. Maya had desperately needed that money. He'd seen it in her face, in her tears, in the way she'd looked at her daughter's photo, and yet she'd left it behind. Who was this woman? What kind of person had that much integrity when nobody was watching? Alexander made a phone call. Get me everything on Maya Rodriguez. And I mean everything. Background, history, current situation, debts, family, everything. I need a complete picture. Sir, we already did a background check when we hired her, his assistant replied. I want more than a background check. I want to know who she really is, what her life looks like, why she's working 3 jobs, what she needs. Get me the full story. Yes, sir. I'll have it for you by tomorrow morning. Alexander hung up and looked at the envelope one more time. Then he looked at the door Maya had exited through. Something had shifted in him. That wall around his heart, the one he'd built brick by brick with every betrayal, every disappointment, every stolen dollar and broken trust, had a crack in it now, and light was coming through. For the first time in years, Alexander Chen felt something he thought he'd lost forever. He felt hope. Hope that maybe his mother had been right. Maybe good people still existed. Maybe they were just quieter, like she'd said. Maybe they were cleaning ladies who cried over money they desperately needed but wouldn't take because it wasn't theirs. Maybe there was still goodness in the world after all. The file arrived on Alexander's desk the next morning. It was thick, detailed, and as he began reading, each page felt like a punch to his gut. Maya Rodriguez wasn't just any struggling single mother working multiple jobs. Her story was heartbreaking, and Alexander found himself getting angry at the universe for being so cruel to someone who seemed so genuinely good. Maya's husband, Daniel, had died 3 years ago in a construction accident. A scaffolding collapse on a high-rise building project. He'd fallen 5 stories and died instantly, leaving Maya 7 months pregnant with their daughter. The construction company had tried to claim Daniel was at fault, that he'd violated safety protocols. They'd fought the death benefits claim for 18 months, while Maya struggled alone with a newborn. Eventually, she'd won the case, but the legal fees had eaten most of the settlement. And by then, the medical bills from Sophia's birth, which had been complicated and required a week in the NICU, had piled up into a mountain of debt. Over $200,000 in total debt, the report said. Medical bills, funeral costs, legal fees, and the mortgage on a small apartment that Daniel had bought for them when they'd first gotten married. Maya had been a college student when she met Daniel, studying education because she wanted to be a teacher. She'd been in her junior year, just 1 year away from graduating when they'd fallen in love and gotten married. She'd planned to finish her degree after the wedding, but then she'd gotten pregnant, and Daniel had wanted her to focus on preparing for the baby. He'd promised she could go back to school once their child was older. He'd promised a lot of things that would never happen now. After his death, going back to college became impossible. Maya needed to work immediately to survive. She'd taken the first job she could find, then added a second when she realized one wasn't enough, then a third. The report detailed her current schedule, and Alexander had to read it twice because it seemed impossible that any human being could maintain this pace. Maya worked at his mansion from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then she rushed across town to wait tables at a diner from 3 until 10 in the evening. On weekends, she stocked shelves at a grocery store from midnight to 6 in the morning. She slept in scattered chunks, maybe 4 or 5 hours total per day. Her daughter, Sophia, was 7 years old now and stayed with Maya's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a widow who watched the little girl in exchange for help with groceries and housework. The report noted that Maya spent every free moment with Sophia, that neighbors often saw them at the small public library on Sunday afternoons, the only time Maya had completely off. The financial breakdown was crushing. After rent, utilities, food, and minimum payments on her debts, Maya had approximately $47 left each month. $47 for everything else. Clothes, school supplies, transportation, emergencies, everything. The report noted that Maya hadn't bought herself new clothes in over 2 years. That she cut her own hair. That she and Sophia shared meals to make the food stretch further. But here was the part that made Alexander's eyes burn. Despite all this, Despite the crushing poverty and exhausting schedule, Maya had never missed a debt payment. Not one. She could have declared bankruptcy. Many people told her to. But she refused because, as she'd told her caseworker, "Daniel worked hard for our life. These bills are from taking care of me and our baby. I won't walk away from them. I'll pay what I owe." The report included statements from people who knew Maya. Her supervisor at the diner said she was the most reliable employee they'd ever had, that she never complained, always smiled at customers even when they were rude, and often gave her tip money to other waitresses who were having bad days. The grocery store manager said Maya had once found a wallet in the parking lot with $800 inside and had waited 2 hours after her shift ended to make sure it was returned to its owner. Mrs. Patterson, Alexander's head of household staff, had added her own notes to the file. "Maya is the hardest worker I've ever supervised. She completes tasks in half the time of other staff, but with twice the quality. She never takes breaks, refuses meals even when offered, and I've never heard her say a negative word about anyone. The other staff members like her but say she's very private. She doesn't talk about her personal life. I believe she's embarrassed by her circumstances." There was a photo in the file. Not a professional one, just a casual snapshot someone had taken at the diner where Maya worked. She was smiling at a customer, and despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes, despite the weight she carried, her smile was genuine and warm. Next to it was a photo of Sophia, taken at her elementary school. The little girl looked exactly like her mother. Same dark hair and shy smile, wearing a school uniform that was slightly too big, probably bought that way so she could grow into it. Alexander closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. He thought about Maya finding that $10,000 yesterday, crying because she needed it so desperately, and still walking away. With that money, she could have paid down debt, bought Sophia new clothes that actually fit, maybe taken a day off to sleep, but she'd left it because it wasn't hers. He thought about her adjusting his position when he pretended to sleep, making sure he'd be comfortable. This woman who probably hadn't slept in a comfortable position herself in 3 years, who worked herself to exhaustion every single day, had been worried about his neck hurting. He thought about her caring for his mother's orchids, tears in her eyes as she read that card. Maya understood loss. She understood love that continued even after death. She'd seen those plants and recognized them for what they were, living memories of someone precious. Alexander made a decision. He needed to do one more test, but this one was different. This wasn't about catching Maya doing something wrong. This was about understanding who she truly was, about seeing her character in one more situation. Because what he was about to do would change her life completely, and he needed to be absolutely certain. The next morning, Friday, Alexander set up his final test. He positioned himself in the breakfast room, a cozy space where morning sunlight streamed through large windows. He pretended to be asleep in one of the comfortable chairs, but this time he didn't leave out money or valuables. Instead, he left out something else. On the table beside him, he placed a stack of college brochures, education programs, teaching degrees, night school options, online courses. He'd highlighted several programs, made notes in the margins, left, it looking like he'd been researching educational opportunities for someone. Next to the brochures, he left a handwritten note on his personal stationery. The note read, "Reminder, research scholarship programs for staff members. Mother always said education was the greatest gift. Set up fund in her name. Priority, single parents returning to school." It was bait, but not the kind he'd used before. This was bait that would show him what Maya truly wanted, what she truly valued, when she thought nobody would ever know. Maya entered the breakfast room at 8 a.m. sharp. Alexander watched through barely open eyes as she saw him sleeping and did her usual routine, adjusting a cushion behind his back, making sure he looked comfortable. Then she saw the materials on the table. Maya froze. She stared at the college brochures like they were treasure maps. Slowly, carefully, she picked one up. Her hands trembled as she looked at the program descriptions, the courses offered, the degree paths. She touched the pages like they were precious, like they were dreams made tangible. Then she saw the note. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her hand to her mouth, clearly trying not to sob out loud and wake him. Her whole body shook with silent crying. Alexander watched her sit down heavily in a chair, still clutching the brochure, still staring at his note. She pulled out her phone and looked at Sophia's photo again. Then she looked at the teaching degree brochure, then back at the photo. The longing on her face was so intense it hurt to witness. Maya sat there for almost 10 minutes, just holding those brochures, crying quietly, letting herself dream for a moment about a different life. A life where she could go back to school. A life where she could become the teacher she'd always wanted to be. A life where she could give Sophia a better future. Then, with visible effort, Maya wiped her tears and carefully put everything back exactly as she'd found it. She arranged the brochures in the same stack, positioned the note at the same angle. She took several deep breaths to compose herself, smoothed her uniform, and picked up her cleaning supplies. But before she started working, Maya did something unexpected. She walked back to where Alexander was pretending to sleep and just looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him. Then she spoke so softly he almost didn't hear it. "Thank you for thinking about people like me," she whispered. "Whoever you're planning to help with that scholarship, they're very lucky. I hope they know how rare it is to find someone who actually cares." Then she added, even more quietly, "Your mother raised a good man. I can see her in the kind things you do, even when you think nobody notices. She'd be so proud." Maya wiped her eyes one more time, straightened her shoulders, and began to clean. She worked with her usual quiet efficiency, but Alexander noticed she kept glancing at those brochures like she couldn't help herself. Like they represented everything she wanted, but believed she'd never have. When Maya finally left the room 30 minutes later, Alexander sat up and stared at the brochures she'd touched so reverently. His vision was blurred, and he realized he had tears in his own eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. This woman, this incredible woman who had every reason to be bitter and angry at the world, who worked herself to death just to survive, who lived in poverty despite her best efforts. She'd thanked him for thinking about people like her. She'd called him a good man when all he'd done for weeks was test her, doubt her, assume the worst. And she'd blessed him with his mother's memory, told him his mother would be proud when she had no idea how much he needed to hear those words. Alexander picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for Monday morning. I need a private meeting with Maya Rodriguez. Tell her it's important, but she's not in any trouble. Make sure she knows that. And tell Mrs. Patterson I want complete privacy. No interruptions." "Yes, sir. May I ask what this is about?" "It's about—" Alexander paused, looking at the photo of his mother on the side table, remembering her words about good people being quieter. "It's about recognizing something valuable when you finally see it, and making sure you don't let it slip away." He hung up and sat back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. His mother used to call it certainty of purpose. That feeling when you know exactly what you need to do, when the right path becomes crystal clear. Maya Rodriguez had spent weeks showing him kindness without expecting anything in return. She'd cared for his things, his space, his memories, and his comfort when she thought he'd never know. She'd demonstrated integrity that most people couldn't maintain even when they were being watched. Now it was his turn. It was time to show Maya that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe did notice the good people, the quiet ones, the ones who did right simply because it was right. It was time to change her life. Maya's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mrs. Patterson had told her yesterday that Mr. Chen wanted to see her Monday morning at 9 a.m. in his private study for a personal meeting. The words, "You're not in trouble," had been included, but Maya couldn't shake the anxiety that had kept her up all night. She'd gone over everything in her mind 100 times. Had she broken something? Cleaned something incorrectly? Overstepped some boundary she didn't know existed? Rich people had rules that normal people didn't always understand. Maybe she'd done something wrong without realizing it. Her Sunday with Sophia had been distracted. They'd gone to the library like always, but Maya kept zoning out, staring at nothing while Sophia picked out books. Her daughter had noticed. "Mama, are you okay?" Sophia had asked, her small hand touching Maya's arm. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." It was her standard answer. Sophia was used to hearing it, but Sophia, wise beyond her 7 years, had hugged her tight and said, "Don't worry so much, Mama. Everything always works out." If only that were true, Maya had thought. Now it was Monday morning, and Maya stood outside Alexander Chen's study at 8:55, wearing her cleanest uniform, her hair neatly pulled back, her hands clasped together to stop them from trembling. At exactly 9 a.m., she knocked softly on the door. "Come in," his voice called. Maya entered and felt her stomach drop. Alexander Chen sat behind his massive desk, looking every bit the billionaire CEO. He was fully awake, alert, dressed in an expensive suit, his expression serious. This was so different from all those times she'd seen him sleeping in various rooms, looking almost vulnerable and human. Right now he looked intimidating. "Mr. Chen," Maya said quietly, "you wanted to see me?" "Yes, Maya, please sit down." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Maya sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She couldn't make herself look directly at him. Whatever was coming, she needed to prepare herself. If he was firing her, she'd already calculated how long she could survive on her other 2 jobs before she'd need to find a third. Maybe she could pick up more shifts at the grocery store. "Maya, I need to confess something to you," Alexander began, and his voice was gentler than she expected. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." Maya's heart sank. Here it came. "For the past few weeks," Alexander continued, "I haven't actually been sleeping during your morning shifts. I've been awake, watching, testing you." The blood drained from Maya's face. She felt sick. He'd been watching her? Testing her? Oh God, what had she done? She'd touched his things, adjusted his position, moved his belongings. She'd overstepped so badly. She was going to be fired, maybe even accused of theft or something worse. "I'm so sorry," Maya blurted out, her voice breaking. "I know I shouldn't have touched your things. I was just trying to be respectful, to make sure you were comfortable. I never took anything, I swear. I never looked at your private documents or your money. I was just trying to help. Please, Mr. Chen, I need this job. I have a daughter and I—" "Maya, stop." Alexander held up his hand, and there was something in his expression that made her pause. "You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong." "That's exactly my point." Maya stared at him, confused, her breath coming in short gasps. Alexander leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "I've been testing people my whole life. After my divorce, after being betrayed by people I trusted, I started testing everyone who came into my world. I'd pretend to be asleep and leave valuable things around. Money, jewelry, confidential documents. And do you know what happened every single time?" Maya shook her head, unable to speak. "People stole from me. People photographed my private information. People took what wasn't theirs. Every single time, Maya. Until you." Maya's eyes widened. "You didn't take anything," Alexander continued, and his voice grew thick with emotion. "You didn't even look at anything. You know what you did instead? You made sure I was comfortable. You covered me with a blanket. You protected my things. You cared for my mother's orchids. You put her photograph back where I could see it and said she must have been proud of me." Tears were streaming down Maya's face now. She hadn't realized he'd been awake for any of that. "And yesterday," Alexander said, his own eyes glistening, "you found $10,000 in an envelope. I watched you hold that money. I saw you crying. I know you needed it desperately, and you put it back. Every single dollar." Maya's hand went to her mouth. He'd seen that too. Her most vulnerable moment, her weakness, her desperation. "Maya, I had my team research your background. I know about Daniel. I know about your daughter. I know you're working 3 jobs and drowning in debt. I know you haven't slept a full night in years. I know you dropped out of college 1 year before graduating. And I know that despite all of this, despite having every reason to be angry at the world, you've shown more integrity and kindness than anyone I've met in the last 10 years. Maya couldn't control her crying now. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I'm not firing you," Alexander said softly. "I'm offering you something different, something better. But I need you to look at me." Maya lowered her hands and forced herself to meet his eyes. What she saw there surprised her. Respect, admiration, something almost like awe. Alexander slid a folder across the desk toward her. "I'm offering you a position as my personal assistant. The salary is $150,000 per year, full health benefits for you and Sophia, retirement contributions, and flexible hours. You'll work Monday through Friday 9 to 5. You'll have your evenings with your daughter. You'll have your weekends free. You'll have a life again, Maya." Maya stared at the folder like it might disappear if she blinked. $150,000? That was more money than she'd imagined making in her entire life. That was freedom. That was security. That was everything. "I can't," she whispered. "Mr. Chen, I don't have a college degree. I'm not qualified to be anyone's assistant, especially not yours. I clean houses. I wait tables. I don't know how to do what you're asking." "You're more qualified than anyone I've ever hired," Alexander said firmly. "You're organized, reliable, honest, and you care about details. Those are the things I need. Everything else I can teach you. And speaking of education," he pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "I'm establishing a scholarship fund in my mother's name. It's for single parents who want to return to school. The fund will cover full tuition, books, and living expenses. Sophia will be the first recipient. Full scholarship for private school starting this fall, and a guaranteed full ride to any college she chooses when she's ready." Maya made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "But that's not all," Alexander continued. "You're also a recipient. You'll be enrolled in an online teaching program starting next semester. The company will pay for everything, and you'll study during work hours. It's part of your job description. In 2 years, you'll have your degree. You'll be the teacher you always wanted to be." Maya couldn't breathe. Her chest felt too tight. The room was spinning. "And your debt," Alexander said quietly. "All of it. Medical bills, legal fees, everything. It's paid. I had my lawyers handle it this morning. You're starting fresh, Maya. Clean slate." "Why?" Maya finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Alexander stood up and walked around the desk. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, not across from her. "Equal level, person to person. My mother died 5 years ago," he said. "Before she passed, she told me something I'd forgotten. She said that the measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching, but what they do when they think no one can see. She said good people exist, but they're quieter. They don't announce themselves. They just do right because it's right." He looked at Maya with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in years. "You did right. Maya, when you thought nobody was watching, when you had every opportunity to help yourself, when you were desperate and alone and exhausted, you still did right. You showed me something I thought didn't exist anymore. You showed me that integrity isn't about what you can afford to have. It's about who you are when nobody's looking." Alexander reached over and took the folders, opening them to show her the contracts, the scholarship papers, the debt payment confirmations. Everything was real. Everything was already done. "You took care of me when you thought I was sleeping," he said. "You took care of my mother's plants. You took care of everything I valued without expecting anything in return. Now it's my turn to take care of you. Please, Maya, let me do this. Let me show you that sometimes, just sometimes, good things happen to good people." Maya looked at the papers through her tears. She thought about Sophia, about being able to tuck her daughter into bed every night instead of rushing off to another job. She thought about going back to school, about finally becoming a teacher. She thought about not being tired all the time, about not lying awake at night, adding up numbers that never quite added up to enough. She thought about Daniel, and somehow she knew he'd want this for her. He'd want her to say yes. He'd want their daughter to have opportunities they'd dreamed about together. "Okay," Maya whispered. "Yes, thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough." "You already thanked me," Alexander said, smiling for the first time she'd ever seen. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger, less guarded. "You did it every morning when you showed kindness to someone you thought was sleeping. You did it when you put back money you desperately needed. You did it when you told me my mother would be proud. You've been thanking me without knowing it. 6 months passed like a dream Maya was afraid to wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was real life, better than she'd imagined life could be. Maya excelled as Alexander's assistant. She brought organization to his chaos, remembered details he forgot, and managed his schedule with efficiency that impressed even him. But more than that, she brought humanity back to his life. She reminded him to eat lunch. She made sure he didn't work 16-hour days. She put fresh flowers on his desk every Monday, always including one orchid in honor of his mother. Sophia thrived in her new school. She made friends, joined the school choir, and brought home report cards that made Maya cry happy tears. The little girl who used to worry about her exhausted mother now bounded through the door each evening, excited to tell Maya about her day. Maya started her online classes and discovered she loved learning even more than she remembered. She studied during quiet moments at work, often discussing her education theories with Alexander, who found her passion infectious. She was going to be an amazing teacher. He knew it. The other staff members noticed the change in Alexander, too. He smiled more. He was patient where he used to be sharp. He'd started a program to help other employees continue their education, inspired by Maya's story. He'd stopped testing people and started trusting them. One evening, Maya stayed late to help Alexander prepare for an important presentation. They were alone in the office, working side by side when Sophia called to say goodnight. "I love you, Mama." Sophia's sleepy voice came through the phone. "Mrs. Chen says to tell you not to work too hard. And she says Mr. Alexander is a good man for helping us." "Is he nice, Mama?" Maya looked at Alexander, who was pretending not to listen but was clearly hearing every word. "Yes, baby," Maya said softly. "He's very nice. He's one of the best people I've ever met." After she hung up, Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You changed my life, you know." "I was becoming someone I didn't like. Someone my mother wouldn't have recognized." "You reminded me who I wanted to be." "You changed my life," Maya countered. "You gave me and Sophia everything we needed. Hope, security, a future." "No," Alexander said firmly. "I just recognized what was already there. Your integrity, your strength, your goodness. Those were always yours. I just made sure the world stopped overlooking them." They smiled at each other, and in that moment, both of them understood something profound. Sometimes the universe does notice the good we do in quiet moments. Sometimes kindness does come back to us multiplied. Sometimes people who've lost faith in humanity find exactly the right person to restore it. And sometimes, a shy maid who shows compassion to a sleeping stranger ends up teaching a jaded billionaire the most important lesson of all: that real wealth isn't measured in money, but in the integrity we maintain when we think nobody's watching, and in the kindness we show when we have nothing to gain. Maya had always had that wealth. Alexander had just helped the world see it, and in doing so, he'd found his own way back to the values his mother had taught him, back to being the man she'd raised him to be. All because one morning, a woman with nothing chose kindness over opportunity, and a man who'd forgotten how to trust chose to finally see the good right in front of him.